Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm here to bring you your midweek message this evening. And I hope and pray that I'm finding all of you extremely well, healthy, safe, warm, and fed. And I just want to say to you tonight that if you are not all of those things, then you need to contact the church. There are people available, there are resources available to help in those areas and places where you may need some. So if you are not all of those things, please contact the church. Phone Hester. We are a church who has available anything that our congregation needs. We will get it, we will find it. We are called to help and serve one another. And we are obviously during this COVID-19 time very concerned about those who are not coping, those who are struggling in many different ways. And so please don't feel bad. Don't put your pride ahead of your needs. Please call the church, and not just for food and warmth and those things. If you are struggling with any other things, Yaku is available, the elders are available, there is help out there, and we are here to help one another. You may remember a few years ago, we spent a very long time at Trinity focused on the theme of one anothering one another, because that is what the church is called to do. The ecclesia is called to help one another. So please reach out for any needs that you may have. We in our home have spent the last 3 months looking at the recipes and dishes we remember from our childhood. George is Greek and I'm Scottish, so we have two very different food cultures, but it's been very interesting. And I can tell you there are some recipes that will not be being made in our kitchen again, but there are also many that will find their way onto our favorite food lists. And just last week, I was making a pot of lentil soup that my mother made when I was little. And I remembered standing next to her at the stove, watching her cook this pot of soup and being horrified and telling her that I wasn't eating it because there was all this disgusting gunk bubbling to the top of the soup. And it was grey and nasty, and I wasn't eating it. And she explained to me that this was all the impurities, the dirt. She called it scum, that bubbled to the top of the soup, and that she didn't mix it back in, that she had a spoon with holes in it. It was called her holy spoon, and she would use the spoon and she would skim off the impurities on the top and discard them. And it really made me think that this was actually what our world is looking like right now. All these impurities and dirt, if you like, that have been bubbling to the top during this time, all the things that are being exposed or coming to our attention. And they were probably already there, but we have been so much more focused on the news, on the world, on the things that are happening in and around us, that we have maybe just become a lot more aware of these things that are bubbling to the top, like poverty and hunger, like racism in a huge way that's bubbling over, gender-based violence, femicide, unfair business practices, things like illegal ways of doing business, of trading, of getting things that we have realized we may need and don't have. And some of us have succumbed to having to deal in those not so great ways. So I think it's opened our minds to a lot, and that's a good thing, that we've become very aware of what is going on in the world around us. But we can't just leave it there. We need to be looking at how we could be skimming that off the top, how we could be helping to make the world a better place. And as Christians, as Christ followers and believers, we need to be doing more. We need to be looking at what we are doing against what we could be doing. And how can we help within ourselves and within our actions and what we put out there as to how we can help to make our world a better place for all of us. And our reading this evening is from Luke chapter 6. I'm reading from the New Revised Standard Version. It's a version that I like to read from time to time, but follow along in your own Bibles. It's Luke 6, chapter 6, and I'm reading verses 12 to 19. Now during those days he went out to the mountain to pray, and he spent the night in prayer to God. And when day came, he called his disciples and chose 12 of them, whom he also named apostles: Simon, whom he named Peter, and his brother Andrew, and James and John, and Philip, and Bartholomew, and Matthew, and Thomas, and James, son of Alphaeus, and Simon, who was called the Zealot, and Judas, son of James, and Judas Iscariot, who became a traitor. He came down with them and stood on a level place with a great crowd of his disciples and a great multitude of people from all Judea, Jerusalem, and the coast of Tyre and Sidon. They had come to hear him and to be healed of their diseases, and those who were troubled with unclean spirits were cured. And all in the crowd were trying to touch him, for power came out from him and healed all of them. The one thing that stood out for me here was I have always considered the disciples, the original disciples, to be 12. And here we see that there was a whole crowd of disciples, and Jesus selected the 12 and named them apostles. So it was very warming to know that there at this point were a whole lot of disciples, people who had come alongside Jesus, people who had become believers and Christ followers and were wanting to learn from him and know more about him and his teachings. And here he selects the 12. But there are 4 aspects of this reading this evening that may let us see a little differently about how the process should actually work, how it worked then and how it could work for us. The first aspect of it is to look at the masses of people, the crowd of needy people. And as I said, there was a crowd, a big crowd, and I'm going to just paraphrase. It says, a great crowd of his disciples had come to hear him and be healed of their diseases, and those who were troubled with unclean spirits were cured, and all in the crowd were trying to touch him because power came out from him. So there were a lot of people here that day when Jesus named those 12, a lot of needy people needing healing and all sorts of things, which is probably how we see our world today. It's a big crowd, a big mass of neediness. And the second part that I'd like us to look at is Jesus himself. So here we see Jesus in 2 aspects. We see him in private, pulling away and praying to the Father. He went away. He prayed the whole night, probably to get the Father's guidance on who he was going to select as the 12 apostles. But he did that often. Jesus often went away in solitude to pray. And the disciples saw this and realized that they wanted to be able to pray like him. And they asked him to teach them. And that's when Jesus taught them how to pray. So prayer in private was a big thing for Jesus. But Jesus was also the Lord and the Master in public. And here we see him ministering to all these needy people. And that was what he was all about, ministering to the needy people in public. The third aspect to look at here is the method in which these 12 disciples were chosen. Here we see them being called apostles. And apostles were people who were sent out. So an apostle was not somebody who would stay in one place, build a church and stay in it. They were people who were sent out. So we begin to see the method or the plan that was being put in place. We have this big throng of disciples, but we have 12 men selected to be sent out. And I don't think that meant to continuously for the rest of their lives walk a road with Jesus in his entourage. Jesus was about to start preparing them to be sent out. And the method that Jesus was going to use was one of multiplication. Multiplication is a very, very powerful thing. If you've ever been affected in any way by cancer, you will understand the power of duplication, because cancer cells duplicate, and then those duplicate, and then those duplicate, and it becomes very big very quickly. So the power of multiplication was something that would allow these people who had been entrusted with Christ's kingdom to spread it out there by being sent out. This method doesn't always work well with people. But if each and every Christian found one person every year to bring to the Lord, and didn't just stop there, but discipled that person to bring another person to the Lord, then we would be practicing multiplication. And then we would be getting the news, the good news out there far quicker than perhaps the way we are doing it at the moment. And what we need to realize with this method is we need to be using this method of multiplication across cultural boundaries, across things like racism that divide us. We need to be looking at those things that are creating issues and problems in our worlds, and we need to be crossing them. We need to be bridging the gap. We need to be using that power of multiplication to cross those boundaries. If we don't have that discipling mindset in our method, then we are perhaps interrupting this process of multiplication that God has put in place. And we need to think about that. What are we doing? Are we bringing others to Christ? Are we helping others help others? Are we just doing it within our own little groups, with people we know, with like-minded people? Or are we crossing over into areas that we are less familiar with? And so we have these three aspects. We have the crowds, we have Jesus Christ within them, and we have this method. And now, if we look at the 12 men that were chosen to put this method into practice, I often wonder if you and I had been there that day, choosing the 12 apostles, would we have chosen those 12 men? I think not. I think I would have looked at the more professional people, at the more upstanding citizens, at the better educated people. The only professional we have in this band of brothers is a crooked tax collector. So we probably wouldn't have chosen them for various reasons. But God chose them. They didn't volunteer. They were conscripted. We don't volunteer to serve Christ. We are called to serve Christ. And it is his job to heal and save. Christ's job to heal and save. But he does it through men and women who are chosen to multiply his grace to others. Simple people like you and I, like those 12 apostles. There's a story you may have heard. It's a conversation between Jesus and the angel Gabriel after Jesus' ascension. And they're having a discussion about Jesus' birth and his life, his ministry, his death and his resurrection. And Gabriel says to him, but how will the people on earth know? How will they know the plan, the story, the gospel? And Jesus says, don't worry. I have a little company of friends on earth. And I have asked them to publish the story. And Angel Gabriel says to him, but what if they don't? What if that plan doesn't work? What if for some reason they fail to do that? And Jesus says, I don't have another plan. I want to close off this evening's message with the prayer of St. Francis, which was written by Francis of Assisi in Italy in the 13th century. Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive. It is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Good night, and God bless.